The text alert came at 11:30 in the morning, right as sunlight hit the marble counter and scattered through the glass vase of lilies still left over from the wedding. $300,000 transfer complete. For a moment I thought it was some kind of glitch, maybe a duplicate notification. Then another message appeared, this time from my mother. Sweetheart, Chelsea needed help. You and Ethan have more than enough. You married rich. I stood there, phone in hand, heart thudding once, twice, then quieting to something dangerously calm. That money wasn't Ethan's. It wasn't even from my parents. It was the last piece of my grandmother's inheritance, the only part of her estate she'd left directly to me, a wedding gift for my future, for stability, for something that was mine. And now it was gone, taken without a word. Wrapped in my mother's signature excuse, family comes first. The sound of the dishwasher hummed behind me, steady and indifferent. I didn't throw my phone. I didn't scream. I just whispered, "Okay," and set it face down on the counter. For the first time in my life, I didn't fight. But silence doesn't always mean surrender. Sometimes it's the sound of something forming beneath the surface, something sharp, deliberate, waiting for its time. Outside, the Seattle sky was its usual shade of hesitant gray. Ethan was still asleep upstairs, exhausted from a week of investor meetings. I made coffee, poured it into the wedding mug that read Mrs. Hale, and stared at the city skyline through the kitchen window. Somewhere across town, my mother was probably arranging tulips on her dining table, pretending everything she did was out of love. When the phone rang again, I answered without greeting. "Mom," I said. "Oh, good. You saw my message, Linda," replied her tone, so casual it nearly broke me. "I was worried you'd think I did something wrong. You moved $300,000 out of my account. Technically, it was your joint account with me, remember, from when you were finishing grad school. We just never closed it." I gripped the counter. "You used my wedding gift to pay off Chelsea's debt. She was drowning, Izzy," she said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Credit collectors were calling non-stop. You and Ethan live in that beautiful townhouse. Surely this won't even make a dent. You married rich. You'll be fine." Her words landed like ice water. "You had no right. Sweetheart," she sighed, "we're family. What's yours is ours. Your grandmother would have wanted you to help your sister." "She left that money for me," I said quietly. "For my future." A pause. Then her voice softened, the kind of softness that always followed manipulation. "Oh, Izzy, don't be selfish. Chelsea's been through so much lately. You've always been the strong one." Behind her voice I heard another faint one, my sister's. "I'll pay her back, I swear," she shouted, slurring a little, probably crying. I pressed my thumb against my temple. "Don't bother," I said. "What's that supposed to mean?" Mom asked, defensive now. "Nothing," I murmured. "Enjoy your day." And I hung up. The silence that followed was thick, almost alive. I stared at my reflection in the kitchen window, the calm version of me, the one who had learned long ago that arguing with Linda Monroe was like shouting into wind. She never heard you unless you agreed with her. Memories came in flashes. Me at 12 bringing home perfect grades and hearing her say, "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Did you see the flowers your sister painted for her art show?" Or at 17 working weekends to save for college while Chelsea maxed out Dad's credit card for creative supplies? I'd been raised to clean up after other people's messes and call it love. When I met Ethan, it was like meeting silence that didn't hurt. He never raised his voice, never played games. He just listened. The night before our wedding, he told me, "You don't owe anyone your peace, Izzy." I'd believed him then. Now, standing in our kitchen, I realized my family had never even known what peace looked like. I walked to my office, the small glass room that overlooked Elliott Bay. Boxes of thank you cards and unwrapped gifts still cluttered the floor. I sat at my desk and opened the folder labeled Inheritance, Monroe Estate. Inside was the letter my grandmother had written before she died, her neat cursive looping with care. "My Isabel, you have always been the quiet flame. Don't let them convince you smallness is safety. Build something that cannot be taken." I traced the line with my finger. Build something that cannot be taken. Maybe that was what this was about all along. When Ethan came downstairs, his tie half knotted, he noticed the look on my face. "What happened, my mother?" I said simply. He frowned. "What did she do?" I told him everything. The text, the call, the tone, that still managed to make me feel 12 years old again. He listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening with every word. When I finished, he leaned against the counter, hands in pockets. "You want me to handle it?" I shook my head. "No. If I fight her, she wins." He looked confused. "How?" "Because she'll make me the villain for defending myself." I took a slow sip of coffee. "I'm not playing her game anymore." Ethan hesitated. "So, what do you want to do?" I turned toward the window, where the bay shimmered under weak sunlight. "Nothing," I said softly. "For now." He nodded slowly, understanding that tone, the one I used when I was already planning something. "You sure?" I looked at him, my voice steady. "She thinks she took my gift," I said. "But really, she just gave me one." That night, while Ethan slept, I opened my laptop and stared at the spreadsheet from my old firm. The numbers danced across the screen: debt ratios, equity loss. I thought about Chelsea's spending, Mom's justifications, the way they both hid behind excuses of love and loyalty. Maybe money wasn't the root of all evil. Maybe it was the mirror that showed what kind of person you really were. I began typing, not an email, not a threat, but a plan. I didn't know it yet, but that document would become the first page of my next life. The next morning, Mom sent another text. "Glad you understand, sweetheart. Family always comes first." I didn't reply. Instead, I deleted her name from my favorites list and replaced it with a note to myself. "Remember this feeling, the quiet before the rebuilding, the beginning of something that will make them see what they chose to ignore." Outside, rain began to fall softly against the window. The lilies on the counter leaned toward the light, still beautiful even as they began to fade. The next morning, I woke before the sun, sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the faint blue light leaking through the curtains. The house was quiet except for the hum of the fridge downstairs and the faint ticking of the wall clock. Ethan was still asleep, his breathing slow and steady beside me. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and walked to the window. Seattle was gray as always, the kind of gray that held its breath before rain. I watched a ferry crawl across the bay and thought about the message my mother had sent the day before. The words wouldn't stop echoing. "You married rich," as if love and hard work were some sort of safety net for other people's recklessness. I made coffee, but didn't drink it. The steam rose warm against my face, then vanished. I sat at the kitchen table, tracing the wood grain with my thumb, remembering the first time my mother called me the strong one. I was 8. Chelsea had broken her favorite porcelain vase while playing dress-up, scattering shards across the living room rug. Mom yelled once, sharp as thunder, and Chelsea burst into tears, wailing like the world had ended. Then, just like that, Mom's voice softened. "It's okay, sweetheart," she said, brushing hair from her face. "Accidents happen." She turned to me, eyes tight. "Isabel, be a good sister. Help clean this up before your father comes home." I remember kneeling on the rug, picking up tiny glass pieces, a slice opening on my palm. Blood welled small and bright. Mom didn't notice. She was hugging Chelsea, murmuring something about forgiveness. That night, when I showed her the cut, she kissed it absently and said, "You're my tough girl." I learned early that pain only mattered if it made noise. By the time I was a teenager, I had stopped trying to make any. Chelsea was the golden one, loud, radiant, effortless. She'd get a C in algebra and Mom would laugh. Numbers just aren't her thing. I brought home straight A's every semester and heard, "Well, of course you did, darling. You're the practical one." Dad stayed out of it, buried in newspapers and sports commentary. My accomplishments became part of the wallpaper, noticed, but only when they were missing. One night during senior year, I sat at the dinner table holding an envelope from Columbia's pre-college program. I had been accepted with a partial scholarship. My hands trembled as I waited for a pause in conversation. Chelsea was talking about her art show, waving a fork like a conductor. When she paused for air, I said I got in. Mom blinked. Got in where? Columbia? The summer program. Oh, she said, smile polite but thin. That's nice. Did you see Chelsea's painting in the paper? They said her color work was very mature. I remember laughing under my breath quietly enough not to be heard. That was the moment I stopped expecting applause. In college, the pattern followed me like a shadow. I worked 2 jobs, one at the library, another tutoring freshmen in statistics. Every few weeks, Mom called, but the conversations were never about me. Chelsea's moving into a new apartment, she'd say, or your sister's having a rough time with her boyfriend. I'd listen, nod, transfer money when needed. Once she ended the call by saying, "You're such a blessing, Isabel. I don't know what we'd do without you." I hung up and cried in the campus library bathroom because it sounded less like gratitude and more like ownership. By 23, I had learned the quiet art of disappearing while still being useful. I helped with bills when Dad got laid off, covered Chelsea's rent twice, and sent Mom gift cards when she complained about grocery prices. Each time I told myself it was temporary, that eventually they'd see I was trying to hold everything together. But the truth is, they liked it that way. I was the invisible glue, reliable, flavorless, and taken for granted. When I met Ethan, everything shifted. He wasn't like them. He noticed small things, the way I held my coffee cup, how I went silent when someone interrupted me mid-sentence. On our 3rd date, he asked what I wanted most out of life. I said, to not feel like a replacement part. He didn't laugh. He just said, then stop volunteering to fix things that don't want to work. The memory of that conversation returned to me now as I stared into the untouched coffee on the counter. The difference between him and my family was that he listened without needing to rearrange the story. Later that morning, Dad called. His number flashing on the screen made my chest tighten. I answered anyway. "Hey Izzy," he said, voice rough from too many cigarettes. "Your mom's worried. Says you're upset." "I'm not upset," I said. "I'm done." A pause. "You know your sister's in a tough spot. Creditors' rent, life's expensive. So she steals mine. Don't start. It's family money. You know your mom just wants peace." I laughed softly. Peace is easy when you're not the one paying for it. He didn't reply. The silence on his end felt heavier than words. Finally he said, "Try not to hold grudges, kiddo. They only make you bitter." "Maybe bitterness is the only thing they can't take," I said, then hung up. The phone slipped from my hand onto the couch. For a long moment I sat there, eyes closed, listening to the city outside, the faint sirens, a barking dog, the world moving forward, as if nothing had changed. But something had. It wasn't rage or heartbreak. It was clarity, cold and bright as new glass. That afternoon I drove to Bellevue without telling Ethan. The neighborhood looked the same. Trimmed lawns, hanging flower baskets, a wind chime singing off-key. When Mom opened the door, her face flickered from surprise to forced warmth. "Izzy, you didn't say you were coming." "Didn't plan to," I said. She ushered me in anyway. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and tension. Chelsea sat on the couch in sweatpants, scrolling through her phone. Piles of unopened mail cluttered the coffee table. I stayed standing. I came to see the transfer paperwork. Mom frowned. "What paperwork?" "The one for the wedding account. The one you emptied." Her tone turned airy, almost amused. "Oh, honey, don't be so dramatic. It was for family." Chelsea glanced up defensive. "I said I'd pay you back." "With what I asked?" "Influencer discounts." Mom's voice sharpened. "Don't speak to her like that. You're making her feel guilty." The sentence struck like a memory I'd already lived too many times. I smiled, but it wasn't kind. Good. Maybe guilt will make her grow up. Mom's cheeks flushed. "You've changed." I had to. Dinner that night was a theater of pretense. Mom poured wine, chattered about her company Ravenwood Interiors and how the new investors were interested. Chelsea scrolled through her phone, occasionally sighing. I cut my chicken slowly, every movement deliberate. At one point, Mom leaned across the table and said, "You don't have to worry about money anymore, sweetheart. You married well. You'll be fine." Chelsea smirked. "Must be nice." The laughter that followed wasn't cruel exactly, it was worse. It was dismissive. I set my fork down. You took my grandmother's money to clean up your mistakes. Don't tell me I'm fine. Mom's eyes narrowed. You've always been so sensitive. Can't you see this family needs harmony? I see it needs accountability. She sighed, dramatically reaching for her glass. You sound just like your father when he's being impossible. I stood up, chair scraping softly against the tile. No, Mom. I sound like the person who finally stopped cleaning up after everyone else. Chelsea rolled her eyes. God, you're so dramatic. I looked at her, really looked. The glossy hair, the empty eyes, the constant need to fill silence with noise. For the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt distance. I'll leave you to your harmony, I said, grabbing my coat. Mom called after me. We love you, sweetheart. I didn't turn around. Outside, the air was cool, the smell of rain sharp and clean. I walked to my car, each step lighter than the last. The house behind me glowed through the windows, full of laughter that sounded like glass about to break. On the drive home, I thought of my grandmother's voice, build something that cannot be taken. Maybe I'd start tomorrow. When I pulled into our driveway, Ethan was waiting by the door, phone in hand. You okay? He asked. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if it was true. What did they say? Nothing new, I said. They never do. He reached for my hand. You don't have to keep fixing them. I know, I said softly. But this time I'm not fixing. I'm building. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the rain, the rhythm soft against the windows. For once it didn't sound lonely. It sounded like preparation. Like something in me had finally stopped waiting for permission to begin. A week passed before anyone from my family called again. I had started sleeping better, waking up earlier, forcing myself to jog along the waterfront just to remember what movement felt like. Seattle mornings were always gray, but lately that color felt like neutrality, not sadness. When the phone rang that Tuesday afternoon, I already knew the number. My father's voice carried the same mixture of guilt and exhaustion as always. Your mother's worried, he began. Things got a little out of hand with your sister. You know how she is. I let silence stretch between us until he filled it. The creditors started calling again. There's talk of a lawsuit from one of Chelsea's old sponsors. Your mom's been handling it, but it's messy. She's still paying her bills, isn't she? I asked. Well, she's trying. She's using what she can. The wedding money helped. The words landed heavy. Dad, I said slowly. Do you even hear yourself? He sighed as if I was the one making things complicated. You know your mother. She just wants peace. Peace. That word again, their favorite shield. I ended the call before he could say it a third time. The quiet afterward was suffocating, but it also felt like space to finally breathe. That night, I opened my laptop and searched Chelsea's name. It didn't take long to find her Instagram. Thousands of followers, pictures of lavender lattes, candlelit dinners, captions about manifesting abundance. Her bio read creative entrepreneur, self-love advocate, helping women find balance. The irony made me laugh out loud. Scrolling further, I found posts about partnerships with clothing brands, makeup lines, travel agencies, all of them promoting a life she didn't actually live. The comments underneath were full of admiration, people thanking her for her authenticity. My stomach tightened. I wondered how many unpaid bills hid behind those filters. The next day I drove to Bellevue again. No warning this time. When Mom opened the door, her face was tired, makeup smudged at the corners, but her smile still rehearsed. Izzy twice in 1 month. What a surprise. Inside, the living room looked smaller than I remembered. Same lemon cleaner smells, same framed family photos where I looked slightly off-center. Chelsea was sprawled on the couch, phone in hand, surrounded by empty coffee cups and envelopes stamped with red letters. Wow, she said, without looking up. Didn't expect to see you again so soon. I came for the paperwork, I said. Mom's smile thinned. Oh, sweetheart, not this again? Yes, this again. I want to see the documents for the account transfer. My account, Chelsea muttered. You really can't let things go, can you? I turned toward her. You stole 30 years of my grandmother's savings and call it letting go. Her tone snapped defensive. I said I'd pay you back. Why are you so dramatic? Mom raised her hand, like she was breaking up children. Enough, both of you. This isn't helping. It's not supposed to help, I said quietly. It's supposed to be honest. She looked at me exasperated. You're upsetting your sister. And you're mistaking accountability for cruelty. The words hung between us. Chelsea's eyes rolled, but Mom looked stunned, like no one had ever dared speak to her that way. Mom straightened, trying to reclaim control. I'm making dinner. Sit down. We can talk this through like adults. I followed her into the dining room. The table was set for 3. She poured wine, her movements tight but graceful. Family sticks together, she said softly, almost to herself. Chelsea joined us, scrolling through her phone between bites of salad. I barely touched my food. Halfway through the meal, Mom began her performance. You don't have to worry about money anymore, Isabel. You and Ethan have everything you need. Your grandmother would have wanted you to share. I looked up slowly. She also wanted you to stop lying about who you are. Her eyes flashed. Excuse me, Ravenwood Interiors, I said. You bragged last time about new investors. That's what this was really about, wasn't it? Paying off company debts. Mom froze wine glass midair. That's none of your concern. It became my concern when you emptied my account. Chelsea leaned forward. Oh my God, stop making everything about you. You're obsessed with control. I met her stare, unblinking. Control, that's rich coming from someone who can't keep a credit card under its limit. Enough, Mom slammed her glass down. You sound ungrateful. You've always been so serious, so cold. Can't you see your sister needs compassion? I pushed my chair back slowly. She's had compassion her whole life, Mom. It's the only currency this family ever spends. The room fell silent. Chelsea glared. Mom tried to recover her composure, smoothing the tablecloth. Let's not ruin dinner. I stood. You ruined enough. Before I could walk away, Mom's tone shifted soft again, manipulative in its sweetness. You've changed, Izzy. That man of yours has made you bitter. No, I said, grabbing my coat. You did that long before he came along. As I walked to the door, she called out, We love you, sweetheart. I didn't look back. Outside, the night air was sharp with rain. I stood by my car, the gravel crunching beneath my heels, and looked back at the house. Through the window, I saw Mom pouring another glass of wine, and Chelsea laughing at something on her phone, the glow lighting her face like a mask. I got in the car and drove until the city swallowed the suburbs. The streets shimmered with water neon reflections stretching across the pavement. I stopped at a red light and let my forehead rest against the steering wheel. They would never change. That realization didn't make me angry, it made me free. When I reached home, Ethan was waiting in the living room, laptop open, notes scattered on the coffee table. He looked up. How bad enough to be familiar, I said. He watched me, quietly waiting. She took the money to save her company, I continued. She thinks I'll forget because she raised me to keep the peace. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. What are you going to do? I met his eyes. Nothing loud. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. You've got that look. What look? The one you get when something's already decided. I smiled faintly. Maybe. Later that night, I sat at my desk, scrolling through public business records, searching Ravenwood Interiors. The company's name appeared in an industry article, declining revenue, delayed payments, potential restructuring. There it was, the weakness. The place where her world could break without me touching a single thing. I whispered to myself, perfect. Rain began tapping the window, soft and rhythmic. I opened a new spreadsheet and started mapping numbers, assets, partners, investors. The same skills they'd once mocked as boring now felt like sharp tools in my hands. When I finally looked up, hours had passed. The clock read 2 in the morning. Ethan was asleep in the next room. The only sound was the rain and the quiet hum of my computer. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen. Columns of data blurred into meaning. Patterns emerged: loans, unpaid equity gaps, fragile partnerships. They built their comfort on borrowed money and borrowed love. And like all debts, this one would come due. The next morning I woke early, showered and dressed as if I were going to work, though I had nowhere to be. My reflection in the mirror looked composed, even peaceful. Over breakfast, Ethan handed me a cup of coffee. "You're quiet." "I'm thinking. About them. About numbers," I said, sipping slowly. "And timing." He smiled. "You don't have to get revenge to heal, you know." I met his gaze. "Who said this is revenge? It's math." He chuckled, but didn't argue. When he left for the office, I returned to my laptop, opening a new folder labeled Simply Ravenwood. Inside, I saved every document, every public file I could find. I didn't know yet exactly what I'd do, only that I would. By noon, I had built the first blueprint of something that felt powerful, a plan shaped not by rage but by logic, the same logic they'd dismissed all my life. They thought silence meant defeat. They forgot silence can echo. 2 weeks later, the final betrayal came in a plain white envelope. I found it in the mailbox on my way back from a morning meeting. The return address read Callahan and Myers Estate Law, the same firm that had handled my grandmother's will. My pulse quickened as I tore it open right there in the driveway. The letter was short and formal, confirming the liquidation of my remaining trust account. Per authorization, signed by Linda Monroe, co-trustee, the sum of $300,000 has been withdrawn for emergency family debt reconciliation. The air around me felt too still. I read the letter twice, 3 times. My mother had drained what was left, the last of my grandmother's gift, the last piece of anything that was meant to be mine. Not an accident, not a misunderstanding. A theft wrapped in legal language. Inside the house, sunlight spilled across the floor in long yellow strips. I dropped the letter on the counter and stared at it. The words blurred until they looked like water. My mother had used my grandmother's signature once to sign a field trip form years ago. I remembered her saying she wouldn't mind. Now she'd done the same thing, except this time it wasn't permission, it was erasure. I sat down, resting my forehead on my hands. The smell of coffee lingered in the air. My chest tightened, not from rage, but from the kind of grief that had no outlet. I thought of my grandmother in her hospice bed, whispering to me between shallow breaths, "Promise me you'll build your own life. Don't let them borrow it." That was the moment something in me broke cleanly, like a wire snapping. I picked up my phone and dialed my mother's number. She answered cheerfully. "Izzy, I was just about to call you." "Did you see the notice?" "I saw it," I said flatly. "Oh, good. I was worried you'd be confused." "Confused about what?" "The trust withdrawal, of course. I meant to tell you sooner, but things have been so hectic with Chelsea's car situation." I gripped the phone tighter. "You used my money to buy her a car. Technically, it was a repayment for what she lost when the old one got repossessed. She needs reliable transportation for work." "For work," I repeated. "She doesn't have a job." "Influencing is a job," my mother said, laughing lightly, as if that ended the discussion. "You married rich, Izzy. You'll never have to worry. Be grateful you can help." The sound that came out of me wasn't quite a laugh. "You had no right." "Oh, sweetheart," she said, slipping into that tone. I'd known my whole life the one that made wrong things sound reasonable. We're family. What's yours is ours. Your grandmother would have wanted you to help." "No," I said quietly. "She wanted you to stop taking." There was a pause long enough to hear her breathing change. Then softly, "Don't start this again, Isabel. You've always been dramatic when you feel left out." Left out. That was the story of my life, with her left out of praise, of affection, of being seen. I hung up before she could say more. The house seemed to vibrate with silence after the call. I walked to the bathroom, turned on the faucet, and leaned over the sink. Water poured hard and cold. I let it run just to drown the noise inside my head. Then I whispered to my reflection, "Never again." The tears came quick and soundless. then stopped as if something inside me had closed for good. I looked at my face in the mirror, pale, tired, but steady. My eyes looked like hers, but colder. I pressed my palms flat against the counter and took a long, slow breath. When Ethan came home that evening, I was still sitting at the kitchen table. The letter was open in front of me, surrounded by legal documents and bank statements. He looked from the mess of papers to my expression and said, "What happened?" My mother drained the rest of the trust. All of it, every cent. He stepped closer, his voice gentle. "Do you want me to call someone, a lawyer?" I shook my head. "Not yet." "Then what are you going to do?" I stacked the papers, neatly aligning the edges, as if order could make sense of chaos. "I'm not sure. But I'm done asking them to see what they've done." He crouched beside me, his hand resting lightly on my arm. "Izzy," he said, "you don't have to fight her alone." "I'm not fighting," I said, and meant it. "I'm done fighting, I'm calculating." He frowned, unsure what that meant, but he didn't press. Later that week, Mom called again. This time, her voice was syrupy, almost triumphant. "We're having brunch Sunday. The family could use a reset. Come home, let's put this behind us." "I'll be there," I said. Ethan gave me a look when I told him. "Are you sure?" "I just want to hear them say it to my face," I replied. Sunday arrived bright and deceptive. The sky was clear, the air sharp with autumn. When I pulled into their driveway, there were extra cars parked outside. Extended family, I guessed. The perfect audience. Inside, laughter spilled from the dining room. My father sat at the head of the table, a newspaper folded neatly beside his plate. Chelsea was dressed like she was hosting a talk show, white blazer, perfect hair, that polished innocence she wore like armor. Mom greeted me with a tight hug that smelled of perfume and guilt. "You made it," she said, voice too bright. I said I would. "Good girl. Come sit. We're celebrating." "Celebrating what family?" she said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I took a seat at the far end of the table. The food looked perfect, the kind of meal people took pictures of for social media. Chelsea was in the middle of a story about rebranding her wellness brand, and everyone nodded as if she were a CEO. When the toast began, Mom stood, glass raised. "To my beautiful daughters," she said warmly. "Chelsea, who's building something wonderful, and Isabel, who's made us all so proud. We're truly blessed." Chelsea grinned. "And cheers to Mom for always keeping this family together." The clinking of glasses echoed. I didn't move. Then Chelsea turned toward me. "And cheers to my big sister, the rich one. Couldn't have done it without you." Laughter rippled around the table. Mom added, "She's not wrong. You've been very generous. It's good karma, sweetheart. The universe rewards kindness." I set my glass down carefully. "You mean theft?" The laughter died. Mom blinked. "Excuse me, the trust money," I said. "You stole it," gasps. My father muttered something under his breath. Chelsea's face turned defensive. "Wow, you're really doing this here." "You wanted me here," I said. "I came." Mom's voice hardened. "We will not make a scene." I looked around the table at the faces, pretending not to know what was happening. "You already did." Chelsea leaned forward, her smile sharp. "You think you're better than us now, because you married a man who can actually pay the bills." I met her gaze, unflinching. "No, I think I stopped mistaking your chaos for love." The silence that followed was complete. Even my father didn't look up. Mom recovered first, forcing a laugh. "She's just tired. Isabel's always been sensitive. You know how she gets." I pushed my chair back. "Sensitive is what you call someone who notices." Mom's smile faltered. "Don't walk away, Izzy. We're family." I stood looking down at her. "No, Mom, we're evidence." I turned and walked out. The sound of my heels on the tile echoed through the house. Outside, the air felt clean, raw, alive. At the car, I stopped and looked back once. Through the window, I could see them still seated, frozen in that perfect tableau of denial, wine glasses, half full, mouths half open. I started the engine and drove away. The further I went, the lighter I felt, like every mile peeled away another layer of noise. That night, I sat on the balcony with a blanket around my shoulders, listening to the ocean crash below. Ethan came out quietly, handed me a cup of tea. Did you get what you needed? More than that, I said. He sat beside me. And now, I said softly, I stop waiting for apologies and start building something that can't be taken. The waves kept rolling steady and endless, as if the world was reminding me that everything broken could still begin again. The morning after the brunch felt unnaturally still. I woke before dawn and sat by the window watching the city below. Wake in soft fragments, streetlights blinking off the first buses groaning down the hill, a jogger in a red windbreaker cutting through the mist. I wrapped my hands around a mug of coffee and listened to the quiet hum of the refrigerator. For once the silence didn't hurt. It felt like a pause between chapters. For years I'd confused silence with surrender, but as the steam curled upward and faded into nothing, I realized silence could also mean something else: preparation. The first thing I did was clean. It wasn't anger that moved me, just a sudden need for space. I boxed up every photograph of my family, their forced smiles, our matching Christmas sweaters, the image of my mother's hand resting on my shoulder like ownership. I packed away cards, trinkets, birthday gifts, even the vase she once claimed came from my grandmother's attic. It didn't matter what was real anymore. I just wanted them gone. As I worked, I thought about every time my mother had called me the strong one. It wasn't praise. It was permission to carry her burdens, to stay quiet while she made excuses, to forgive without being asked. By the time I finished cleaning, the living room felt like new air. I opened my laptop and searched Ravenwood Interiors again. Their homepage was painfully outdated, soft gold fonts, a slideshow of half-finished projects, a headline that read "Timeless Design for the Modern Family." I almost laughed at the irony. Scrolling through business directories, I found something more interesting. The company was listed under a partial ownership by Henderson Capital Group, a private equity firm based in Los Angeles. Their portfolio included struggling lifestyle brands and a few fading retail chains. The data told a story my mother never would. Ravenwood wasn't thriving. It was drowning. I leaned back in my chair and whispered, "So that's what you took the money for?" By noon, I'd filled an entire notebook with notes, financial statements, projected losses, restructuring possibilities, all public information, but enough to map the skeleton of the company. If Henderson Capital was looking to unload it, that meant opportunity. That evening, Ethan found me still typing, eyes fixed on the screen. "You've been here all day," he said softly. "I'm working on something." He glanced at the spreadsheet. "Ravenwood? Yes. Is this about your mom?" I shook my head. "It's about balance." He studied me for a long moment, the way people look at someone standing on the edge of something. "Izzy, you don't have to do this. You can let it go." "I already let it go," I said, closing the laptop. "Now I'm just learning what silence can build." That night I couldn't sleep. The rain came softly at first, tapping against the windows, then harder, like the sky was trying to remind me what noise sounded like. I walked into the office and opened the window, letting the cool air fill the room. I took out my grandmother's old letter, the one I kept tucked in a leather notebook. "Build something that cannot be taken." The next morning I began. I called Tanya Brooks, a woman I'd once worked with at my old finance firm. She was sharp, fearless, and most importantly discreet. We met at a quiet cafe near Pike Place, where the smell of espresso mingled with salt air. Tanya arrived in a gray coat and a smile that could cut glass. "I was surprised to get your message," she said, sitting down. "You vanished after the wedding. I figured you were living the Malibu dream." "Not quite," I said. "I need your help setting up a new company. A clean LLC, no personal identifiers." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "Sounds mysterious." "Let's call it Morena Group," I said. "I want it to look like a small, female-led investment firm focused on ethical acquisitions." "Ethical," she repeated, grinning. "Always the saint. Sometimes ethics make the best disguise." She laughed softly, then leaned forward. "Okay, Isabel. What are we buying?" I slid a printed report across the table. "Ravenwood Interiors." Her eyes scanned the page. "Your mother's company." Not for long, I said. Tanya sat back, processing. You're serious, completely. She studied me a moment longer, then nodded slowly. Then let's make it clean and quiet. You'll need a shell firm, maybe two. Henderson Capital's been trying to offload assets, they'll jump at the offer. How soon? A few months if we move fast. Let's move faster, I said. For the next several weeks, I lived between spreadsheets and late-night phone calls. Tanya and I met in borrowed offices and co-working spaces, writing proposals, building a narrative of financial stability around Marina Group. We found an attorney who owed her a favor, an accountant willing to sign NDAs, and a silent partner to front the initial meetings. During those weeks, I stopped calling my family altogether. They didn't notice. Meanwhile, my mother kept posting photos from her company events on social media, smiling with her team, raising glasses of champagne, quoting leadership books she'd never read. Gratitude is the key to abundance, one caption read. I stared at it longer than I should have. Gratitude had never been her key to anything. Control was. At night, when I was too tired to think, I'd lie awake beside Ethan and listen to the city breathing outside. You're not sleeping again, he said one night. I'm building, I whispered. Building what? Something that can't be taken. He didn't ask again. Weeks blurred into months. Every move had to be calculated, every email precise. Henderson Capital was cautious but curious. They'd lost money on Ravenwood for years, and were desperate to unload it without public embarrassment. Tanya played her role perfectly, calm, confident, convincing. Through Marina Group, we presented ourselves as saviors with vision. We believe in restructuring, not demolition, Tanya told them. I watched from across the table during one Zoom call, camera off, listening to the ease in her tone. When the meeting ended, she called me. They're interested. They want a proposal. Send it, I said. After hanging up, I walked to the window and looked out at the skyline. The rain had stopped and sunlight reflected off the glass buildings like mirrors. In one reflection, I caught my own face, focused, unflinching. I didn't look away. By then, I had memorized every number tied to Ravenwood's survival. Supplier debts, late payments, fraudulent invoices signed under my mother's name. She'd been playing queen in a crumbling castle. One night I dreamed I was standing in that castle, walls made of glass, cracks spidering under my hands. I pressed my palm against them and felt them give way, the sound like a sigh. I woke up before it broke completely. The next morning I opened the Ravenwood file again and circled 3 words in red ink: buy, restructure, replace. Ethan noticed the note when he passed my desk. Replace who? He asked. I smiled without answering. By early spring, the first phase of the plan was ready. Tanya had secured initial agreements with 2 investors, and Henderson Capital wanted to meet in person. They're flying us to LA, she said over the phone. Final talks next week. Then it's time, I said. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and walked to the balcony. The air smelled like rain and sea salt. Somewhere below, waves rolled against the shore in a steady rhythm. I thought about the word revenge. It felt too small now, too childish. What I wanted was equilibrium, a world where actions finally had weight. When I went back inside, I passed the shelf where I'd left the family photographs. The boxes were gone. I'd thrown them out that morning. I turned off the lights and stood in the darkness, listening to the hum of the house. Silence no longer sounded like waiting. It sounded like power gathering its breath. I whispered to myself, they think I've disappeared. And then softly, like a promise, they'll see what silence can do. The plane touched down in Los Angeles just after sunrise. From the window seat, the city looked like an endless sprawl of glass and sunlight, every street glinting like a blade. Tanya was already scrolling through her phone beside me, checking messages from the attorneys. They confirmed the meeting, she said without looking up. 11 a.m. at Henderson Capital, 8th floor. I nodded, my reflection caught faintly in the glass. I had tied my hair into a low knot, replaced my usual gold studs with small silver hoops, and put on a pair of clear lens glasses. A disguise not meant to deceive, just to distance myself from the woman they once dismissed. Marie Donovan, I said, quietly practicing the name I would use for the meeting. Tanya smiled. You wear it well. The drive downtown was quiet. Los Angeles smelled like ambition, warm asphalt, citrus, and exhaust. The streets were lined with billboards of faces smiling at things they didn't believe in. As we passed them, I wondered how many of those smiles were just survival and makeup. At Henderson Capital's lobby, everything gleamed. The receptionist led us through glass doors into a room filled with chrome white leather and cold air. A long window overlooked the city, the kind of view designed to remind you how small you are. I wasn't small anymore. Jason Lee, the senior partner handling Ravenwood's portfolio, entered with the polite arrogance of a man who expected to win every conversation. Miss Donovan, he said, extending his hand. Pleasure to finally meet you. His grip was firm. I matched it. Likewise, Mr. Lee. Thank you for taking the time. We sat across from him as an assistant brought in coffee. Tanya took notes while I unfolded a slim binder filled with projections. Morena Group is interested in Ravenwood Interiors, I began. We believe in sustainable restructuring, reviving legacy brands with integrity. Jason leaned back. Integrity? That's a nice word. But you do realize Ravenwood's been bleeding cash for 5 years, I smiled. That's why it's available, he chuckled. You're bold. Numbers don't reward timidity. Tanya hid a grin behind her pen. I continued, flipping a page. Your last quarterly filing shows rising debt-to-equity ratios, vendor dissatisfaction, and a 15% decline in client retention. But the core business still has value: the design team, the client list, the name recognition. Jason raised a brow. You've done your homework. I lived in its aftermath, I said, before I could stop myself. He didn't catch the slip, or maybe he did and didn't care. The rest of the meeting flowed like a chess match, offers, counteroffers, cautious admiration. By the end of the hour, Henderson agreed to preliminary terms. Jason extended his hand again. You've got yourself a deal, Miss Donovan. Subject to due diligence. I shook his hand, calm, professional. We'll make it worth your time. As soon as we stepped into the hallway, Tanya exhaled. You were terrifyingly good. It's just math, I said. No, she said, smirking. It's theater with spreadsheets. We rode the elevator down in silence. When the doors opened, the noise of the city rushed in. It felt like stepping into sunlight after years underground. That evening, we met in a small rented office near Santa Monica. Tanya spread out the documents on a long table. If we finalize this, Morena Group will control 61% of Ravenwood through layered partnerships, she said. Technically, you could run it from anywhere. I looked out the window at the darkening sky. I don't want control, I want clarity. Clarity. When you see something for what it really is, it stops owning you. She studied me, then nodded. All right, philosopher, what's next? Next, I said, we make sure Henderson doesn't realize who they're selling to until it's too late. We worked late into the night, cross-checking paperwork and rewriting proposals. The office smelled like burnt coffee and printer ink. At one point, Tanya looked up from her laptop. You ever think about what happens when she finds out I didn't answer right away? Outside, a car alarm wailed and then fell silent. If she finds out, she'll finally understand what strong looks like. Back in Seattle, life at Ravenwood went on as if nothing were coming. My mother posted motivational quotes online. Success favors the fearless, while her emails to investors grew more desperate. I knew because Tanya had contacts who forwarded them to us. The company's accounts were a slow bleed. She was just rearranging the furniture on a sinking ship. Ethan noticed how quiet I'd become. One night, he set 2 glasses of wine on the counter and asked, Is this still about revenge? No, I said. It's about correction. He frowned slightly. You sound like an engineer talking about human lives. Maybe that's the only way I can. He didn't argue. He just nodded because he knew I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. A few weeks later, Tanya called. We're ready for phase 2, she said. Henderson wants to close the sale before the next quarter. If we move now, Morena can take full control quietly. I stared at the rain streaking down my window. Then we move. On the day of the signing, the boardroom at Henderson Capital smelled of leather and money. Contracts lined the table thick with promises. Jason Lee handed me a silver pen. "Congratulations, Miss Donovan. Ravenwood is officially yours." The sound of the pen scratching paper was almost musical. As I signed the last page, a calm I hadn't known in years settled over me. I thought about my mother's laughter at that brunch, Chelsea's smirk, the sound of their voices echoing against polished glass. When it was over, Tanya whispered, "You did it." I closed the folder. "Not yet," I said. "I just set the stage." That night, I walked alone through the hotel's rooftop terrace. The city stretched endlessly below, glittering like circuitry. Somewhere down there, my mother was probably hosting another dinner, talking about her turnaround plan, completely unaware she no longer owned the roof over her head. I leaned on the railing and let the wind hit my face. It wasn't joy I felt. It was symmetry. For the first time, the world felt balanced. The next morning, I called Henderson's liaison to confirm the transition timeline. "The board at Ravenwood will be notified in 3 weeks," he said. "You'll need to attend the introductory meeting as the new majority investor representative." "Understood," I replied. After the call, I sat for a long time staring at the ocean through the hotel window. My reflection hovered over the waves, steady, composed, unrecognizable from the girl who used to sweep up her sister's broken glass. Back in Seattle, the city welcomed me with its familiar chill. Tanya met me at the office, her hair pulled back, eyes gleaming with caffeine and victory. "It's done," she said. "You own Ravenwood Interiors." Legally, entirely quietly. I nodded, setting my bag down. "Good. Then, let's fix it before they know who broke it." That night, I didn't call my mother. I didn't even think about calling. Instead, I opened the file with the company's internal reports, budgets, staff performance, vendor payments. Buried deep in the data was her signature on several questionable expense forms. Personal trips labeled as client meetings. Executive hospitality invoices that matched hotel stays in Napa and Palm Springs. Evidence. I leaned back in my chair, fingers laced together. "She built her house on borrowed bricks," I murmured. "Now it's time to collect rent." The rain began again, tapping against the glass. I turned off the lamp and sat in the glow of my computer screen. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was inevitability. I thought of my grandmother's words, soft but unshakable. "Build something that cannot be taken." I had built it. Now I was going to walk into her kingdom, not as the daughter she ignored, but as the quiet force she never saw coming. And when the time came, I wouldn't need to raise my voice. The papers would speak for me. The silence would finish the sentence. The flight home was uneventful. I spent most of it staring out the window, watching clouds flatten against the wings and dissolve in the sunlight. The deal was finalized, the contracts signed, the money transferred. I owned Ravenwood Interiors now, though not a single person in that company knew it yet. The thought didn't make me giddy, it made me still. By the time the plane touched down in Seattle, my phone was full of messages from Tanya. Updates, confirmations, legal alerts. All clean. One text read, "You're officially the majority stakeholder. Welcome to the throne, Your Majesty." I smiled faintly, though there was no triumph in it. Thrones were heavy. I had no interest in sitting down yet. The following morning we met at our shared workspace downtown, a minimalist office with glass walls and too much sunlight. Tanya arrived with her usual energy, her laptop under one arm, 2 coffees in hand. "Okay, boss," she said, setting one cup in front of me. "You're officially running a sinking ship. Congratulations." I took a sip. "Then let's keep it afloat long enough for everyone to realize who the captain is." She grinned. "You sound terrifying when you say things like that." "It's just clarity," I said, "not terror." We reviewed the acquisition plan again, how Morena Group, through its layered shell companies, now controlled 61% of Ravenwood shares. How Henderson Capital had already cashed their exit fee, walking away quietly. It was all airtight. On paper, I was a ghost investor named Marie Donovan, an untraceable owner with no connection to the Monroe family. When we were done, Tanya leaned back in her chair, stretching. So when do you plan to tell her I didn't look up from the spreadsheet? When it matters. She raised an eyebrow. And when will that be? I smiled faintly. When she's sitting across from me and realizes the air has changed. That night I went home and cooked dinner for the first time in weeks. Ethan joined me in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, cutting vegetables while I stirred the sauce. You've been quieter than usual, he said. Have I? Yeah. The kind of quiet that hums. I looked at him, the corners of my mouth lifting. That's the sound of gears turning. He studied me for a second. You really did it, didn't you? You bought the company. I nodded. Officially, yes. He set down the knife. So what happens now? Now, I said, we wait for gravity to do its work. The next week unfolded like a whisper of inevitability. Emails from Ravenwood's staff trickled into the Morena inbox, reports of confusion about new ownership, rumors about restructuring. My mother, of course, was the loudest voice in the confusion. Tanya showed me a transcript of her company-wide memo. We've been acquired by new investors who see our potential, it read. This is a new chapter for Ravenwood, and I'll continue leading us with the same integrity you've always known. Integrity. I nearly laughed out loud. Tanya glanced at me over her monitor. You know, she's kind of impressive. The level of delusion takes talent. Delusion is her favorite language, I said. She speaks it fluently. While she postured and preened, I moved quietly. Our legal team began auditing internal accounts, restructuring vendor contracts, and replacing outdated policies. Every document crossed my desk for approval, every signature disguised under the name of Morena's board. My fingerprints were everywhere, invisible and undeniable. At the same time, Tanya discovered something interesting. You'll love this, she said one afternoon, sliding a file toward me. Henderson's open to selling off 2 other firms under the same umbrella. If we bundle them with Ravenwood, you could triple the portfolio size. I studied the numbers. They made sense. Do it. Tanya raised a brow. No hesitation. None, I said. If I'm building something, I might as well make it large enough that she can't ignore it when it lands. Meanwhile, in Bellevue, my mother and sister went on pretending the world still revolved around them. They posted brunch photos, made vague references to business ventures, and ignored the mounting tension in their own backyard. Henderson Capital had sent formal notice to Ravenwood's management about the transition, but no one there had read it carefully enough to realize who held the leash now. One evening, I was at my desk reviewing financials when my phone buzzed. A message from my father. Your mom's been off lately. Says something's changing at work. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? I stared at the message for a long time before replying. I know everything's finally changing. That's all. He never responded. The following week, Tanya and I flew to Los Angeles again to finalize some of the secondary deals. The meetings went smoothly, the signatures clean. As we walked out of the Henderson building, she nudged me lightly. You know, she said, most people would have taken that $300,000 and walked away. You took it and built an empire. I'm not building an empire, I said. I'm correcting an equation. She laughed. You really do talk like a scientist. Numbers don't lie, I said. People do. Back in Seattle, I spent the next few days preparing for what would come next, the board introduction. Henderson had scheduled the formal meeting with Ravenwood's executives and department heads to announce the new investors. It was set for Friday, 10 in the morning. My mother would be there. So would Chelsea, playing the role of company influencer, her title as hollow as the promises that had bought it. On Thursday evening, Tanya and I met in my office one last time. She brought a bottle of champagne. For tomorrow, she said, setting it on the table. You've earned this. I'll open it after. I said. After what? After the room goes quiet. Tanya tilted her head. You're not going to blow up, are you? No, that's the beauty of it. I smiled. I won't have to. That night I couldn't sleep. The rain came in soft sheets, steady and rhythmic. I walked through the dark house barefoot, trailing my fingers along the walls. Each step felt deliberate, like walking towards something I'd been waiting for my whole life. I paused by the window overlooking the water. The ocean was invisible, but I could hear its steady, endless shore. "Ethan found me there an hour later." Nervous, he asked. "Not exactly. Then what I'm thinking about tomorrow." He smiled softly. "You're going to walk into that room and own it." "I already do," I said. "They just don't know yet." He laughed quietly and kissed my forehead. "Remind me never to underestimate you." "Please do," I said. "That's when I work best." The next morning I dressed carefully. A charcoal gray suit, understated jewelry, my hair tied back. No perfume, no flash. I didn't want them to see glamour. I wanted them to see control. Tanya picked me up just after 8. She glanced over from the driver's seat, smiling nervously. "Ready, more than ready. Marie Donovan, CEO of Morena Group," she said, pretending to read from a card. "Investor strategist, mystery woman." I chuckled softly. Let's hope they like mystery. As we drove toward downtown Seattle, I watched the clouds part over the skyline. Light spilled across the glass buildings, pale and sharp. Somewhere, inside one of those towers, my mother was rehearsing another speech about leadership and legacy. She'd probably picked out her most expensive dress, the one she wore when she wanted to look powerful. She'd never look smaller than she would in an hour. Tanya glanced at me again. "You okay?" "I'm fine," I said, just thinking about how long I've waited for silence. "What do you mean?" "For years, silence was the punishment. Tomorrow it's going to be the weapon." The light turned green. The car moved forward. The city blurred past us, glass and steel and memory. For the first time I felt no fear, only symmetry. By the time we reached Ravenwood's building, the rain had stopped. The air was crisp, the kind that carried promise and consequence in equal measure. I stepped out of the car, smoothed my jacket, and looked up at the sign above the entrance, Ravenwood Interiors. The name no longer belonged to her. Tanya handed me the folder with the final ownership documents. "You're sure you want to be there in person?" "Yes," I said. "She deserves to see the end of the story she started." And as we walked through the glass doors into the lobby, every echo of the past, the lies, the favoritism, the silence fell away. All that remained was the truth waiting in the boardroom upstairs. Tomorrow had come. The call came just after 6 in the morning. I was halfway through my first cup of coffee when Tanya's name flashed on my phone. "It's done," she said, her voice still rough from sleep. The final wire cleared overnight. Morena Group now holds full controlling interest in Ravenwood Interiors. For a long moment I didn't say anything. I just stared out the kitchen window at the thin mist rising off the bay. "So it's real," I said finally. "It's real," she confirmed. "You're the owner, Izzy. Every square inch of that company is yours now." The word owner didn't land like triumph. It landed like gravity. "All right," I said quietly. "Let's get to work." I spent the morning reviewing the documents. The pages were dense with signatures and seals, corporate jargon, and legal precision. Every clause meant something permanent. By the time I finished, my coffee was cold, and the sun was higher, cutting sharp lines across the table. I looked at the folder and thought, "You have no idea who's standing over you now, Mom." At 10, Tanya stopped by the office. She tossed her coat over the chair and set down a box of pastries. "You should be celebrating." "I don't need to celebrate," I said, scanning a line on the contract. "I just need to breathe." "Fine," she said, sinking into the chair across from me. "So when do you tell them I closed the folder?" "Tomorrow." Her eyebrows shot up. "You're really walking into that meeting?" "Yes." "You could just stay behind the curtain, you know. Let me handle the introductions." I shook my head. "No more hiding. She took enough of my name. She doesn't get to take my silence too." Tanya leaned back, smiling slowly. "You know you're terrifying when you're calm." The next day I woke early. The sky was a pale gray, the kind that made the world feel suspended. I showered, dressed in a simple black suit, and tied my hair back. I didn't want to look like revenge. I wanted to look like consequence. By 9:30, I was downtown sitting in the car outside Ravenwood's headquarters. Through the glass doors, I could see employees moving through the lobby, laughing, carrying coffee cups. None of them knew that everything above their heads had shifted. Tanya sat beside me, tapping her pen against a notepad. "You sure you don't want to send someone else in?" First, I looked at her steady. "No. I want her to see me walk through that door." We entered the building. The receptionist, a young man with bright eyes, smiled. "Good morning, Miss Donovan. The conference room is ready. They're expecting you." Expecting me. The irony almost made me laugh. The elevator ride felt longer than it should have. Tanya glanced at me, then at the mirrored wall. "You okay?" "I'm fine." She studied me for a second. "You don't look fine. You look peaceful." "I am," I said. That's what happens when the story finally catches up to itself. When the doors opened, the hallway was quiet, except for the muffled sound of voices behind the boardroom door. I could recognize my mother's laugh even through the wall, sharp, confident, full of performance. Tanya placed a hand on my arm. "Last chance to change your mind." I smiled faintly. I already changed everything else. Inside the boardroom, the room fell silent as soon as the door opened. A dozen faces turned toward us, some curious, others cautious. My mother was at the far end of the table, dressed in a cream blazer, hair immaculate. She blinked once, twice, as if her brain was still catching up with what her eyes saw. "Izzy," she said finally, her voice small in the large room. I didn't answer. I simply walked to the head of the table and placed my folder down. "Good morning, everyone," I said evenly. "I'm Marie Donovan, representing Morena Group, the new majority shareholder of Ravenwood Interiors." A ripple of whispers moved through the room. My mother's lips parted. Chelsea, sitting beside her with a company badge clipped to her dress, stared at me in disbelief. "You," my mother said. I met her eyes. "Me." Jason Lee from Henderson Capital cleared his throat from the corner. "Ladies and gentlemen, Morena Group finalized the purchase as of yesterday. Miss Donovan," he paused, correcting himself, "Miss Monroe will be overseeing the initial restructuring phase." The air seemed to thin. My mother tried to laugh, the sound brittle. "This is some kind of joke." "No joke," I said quietly. "Just math. You remember math, don't you, Mom?" "The thing you said made me boring." Her face drained of color. Chelsea's voice trembled. "You can't just walk in here and take over." "I didn't walk in," I said. "I bought in. There's a difference." My mother stood abruptly. "You're doing this to humiliate me." I looked at her, unblinking. "No, I'm doing this to fix what you broke." Silence filled the room like smoke. Then, in that awful stillness, something inside me loosened. For years I'd imagined this moment as thunder, as fury. But instead it was quiet, measured, precise, final. I turned to the rest of the board. "Starting Monday, we'll begin the transition process. Audits, vendor reviews, new leadership assessments. Anyone involved in financial mismanagement will be reviewed and reassigned." The HR director nodded nervously. "Understood." Chelsea stood, her voice sharp. "You can't suspend our mother," I faced her. "The company can. And it will." My mother's breath hitched. "Isabel," she said softly, the name shaking on her tongue. "Please." "You should sit down," I said, my voice steady. "You're no longer in charge." She did sit slowly, her hands trembling as she smoothed her skirt. I opened the folder and slid several documents across the table. "Here's the new structure. You'll each receive an updated contract by end of day. Anyone unwilling to adapt can collect severance within 2 weeks." Jason Lee glanced between us, visibly uneasy. "Well," he said with forced cheer, "looks like Ravenwood's in good hands." No one spoke. When the meeting adjourned, I gathered my papers. My mother stayed seated, her eyes distant, uncomprehending. I could feel her looking at me, searching for the daughter she used to command. She wouldn't find her. As Tanya and I walked out, Chelsea muttered something under her breath. "You'll regret this." I turned just enough to meet her gaze. "Maybe. But at least I'll own my mistakes." Can you say the same? The hallway outside was brighter than I remembered. The elevator doors opened, and Tanya exhaled as soon as they closed behind us. Holy hell, she whispered. That was biblical. It was overdue, I said. Downstairs, the receptionist smiled politely as we passed. The city outside was loud with traffic, but I could barely hear it. Everything sounded softer now, muted and clean. Tanya stopped beside the car. What now? Now, I said. We rebuild. She hesitated. And her? She'll watch. That night I didn't feel triumphant. I felt something quieter, heavier, more complete. I sat on the balcony, the folder beside me, and watched the city lights shimmer across the water. Somewhere across town, my mother was probably sitting in her own living room, trying to understand how everything she'd built had slipped through her fingers. I thought of her words from that brunch. You married rich. You'll be fine. She was half right. I was fine. But not because of marriage, because I'd finally stopped waiting for her permission to exist. The ocean wind picked up cool and sharp. I closed my eyes and let it wash over me. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the strong one. I felt like the free one. The morning after the meeting, the world felt strangely quiet. I woke before the alarm sunlight spilling across the floor like it had something to say. The house smelled of coffee and salt air. For a moment I stood in the kitchen barefoot, half expecting my phone to buzz for someone to demand an explanation for the chaos to find me again. But it didn't. Instead, there was only the silence, the kind that follows an earthquake when the ground has finally decided to stop shaking. By 9, my inbox was full. Headlines, press inquiries, board updates. Tanya had already filtered most of them. She texted, "We'll handle the noise. Just breathe." I tried, but I couldn't stop picturing my mother's face from the day before, the disbelief, the tremor in her voice the moment she realized her throne had vanished. I didn't feel triumph. I felt release, like an invisible weight had been cut loose. At 10:30, Tanya called. "It's starting," she said. "The news is everywhere. Ravenwood Interiors acquired by Morena Group. Your name's not in it, obviously. But guess who's trending on Twitter? Chelsea, right on cue. People are digging up her old posts, those fake philanthropy projects. Some are calling it karma. Karma doesn't need a spotlight," I said quietly. "Well," Tanya replied, "it has one anyway." I opened my laptop, scrolling through the coverage. The words blurred together: corporate scandal, leadership change, internal audit. They'd found hints of misconduct, old invoices signed in my mother's name, expense reports she couldn't justify. By noon, Ravenwood had released an official statement confirming her suspension. Tanya texted again. "You're trending too." Someone leaked the clip from the meeting. I hesitated, then clicked the link. There it was, the boardroom. My mother's shocked face, my calm voice saying, "You're no longer in charge." The video had been shared thousands of times. Comments flooded in, people speculating about family drama and poetic justice. I closed the laptop. "They were always good at telling stories," I whispered. "Now they finally have one worth repeating." By the afternoon, my father called. I stared at the screen before answering. "Izzy," he said, his voice measured, "your mother's not doing well. She's saying you set her up." "I didn't set her up," I said. "I just stopped protecting her. She's been crying for hours. She should try years," I said before hanging up. That night, I didn't turn on any lights. The house glowed faintly from the city, outside soft blue against the walls. I sat by the window watching cars drift along the highway like silver veins. When my phone buzzed again, I almost ignored it. Then I saw the name Chelsea. The message was short. "You win. Hope it was worth it." I didn't reply. There was nothing to win. The next morning, the media storm was worse. Business sites ran headlines about the fall of the Monroes. Photos of my mother leaving the office surfaced, her eyes hidden behind sunglasses, her mouth set in a tight line. Someone filmed her snapping at a reporter who asked, How does it feel to lose your company to your daughter? That clip went viral within hours. Ethan found me in the living room that evening, curled on the couch with the news muted. You could stop watching, he said gently. I could, I said, but I think I need to see the ending. He sat beside me. This isn't the ending, Izzy. This is the middle of your piece. I looked at him and smiled faintly. That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me. He put his arm around me, pulling me close. Then maybe it's time to start writing the next part. The next day, Tanya came over with 2 coffees and a grin that was equal parts exhaustion and pride. You're officially the most talked about woman in corporate Seattle, and nobody even knows your real name. I laughed softly. Let's keep it that way. You sure? She asked. You could take the credit. Step into the light. Everyone loves a redemption arc. I'm not interested in redemption, I said. I'm interested in peace. She studied me for a second, then nodded. You really are your grandmother's granddaughter. I smiled. She told me once that power doesn't have to announce itself. It just has to stand still long enough for the noise to wear itself out. Tanya leaned forward, tapping the table. So what now? Now, I said, we build something new. A foundation. Scholarships. Something that actually helps people who grew up hearing they were the strong ones. Tanya's eyes softened. That's a better legacy than any company. As the weeks passed, the storm began to fade. My mother disappeared from public view, retreating into quiet denial. Chelsea's following collapsed. Brand deals dissolved. She posted a teary apology video that the internet mocked for its lighting more than its sincerity. I didn't respond to any of it. I didn't need to. Then one afternoon, a package arrived at my office with no return address. Inside was a photo me and Chelsea as kids sitting on the porch steps, popsicles melting down our hands. On the back, in my mother's handwriting, were the words, "You were always the light. I just didn't see it." I stared at it for a long time before tucking it into the bottom drawer of my desk, beneath old contracts and legal papers. Not to treasure it, just to keep it somewhere real. That evening I went for a walk along the waterfront. The air was crisp, the water dark and smooth as glass. I thought about the years I'd spent waiting for someone to notice how much I'd given, how much I'd endured, and I realized the point wasn't being seen. The point was that I had seen myself. A gull cried overhead, the sound lonely but not sad. The tide pulled back, revealing wet sand that shimmered under the streetlights. I kicked off my heels and stepped into it, cold and grounding. When I came home, Ethan was waiting on the couch with 2 glasses of wine. To the quiet, he said, lifting his glass. To the quiet, I echoed. We sat there for a while, listening to the rain begin again. It wasn't a storm, just a steady rhythm, the kind that matched a heartbeat. Somewhere out there, my mother was probably sitting in her own silence, grappling with the same sound. I hoped she found peace, not because she deserved it, but because I did. Before bed, I opened my notebook and wrote one line at the top of a blank page. I forgive her, but I will never forget who I became because of her. Then I closed it, placed it on the nightstand, and turned off the light. Outside, the world went on buses, rain, the hum of life moving forward. Inside, I finally slept without dreaming of anyone else's approval. And in the silence that followed, I realized that the quiet I had built was not an ending. It was the sound of something beginning again. The morning after the news broke, the city felt different. The air was cool, almost metallic, the kind of morning that carried too much quiet with it. I stood on the balcony, a mug of coffee in my hand, watching fog curl around the harbor like smoke from an old fire. Below me, the world kept moving, delivery trucks rumbling down the street, a woman walking her dog, a jogger with headphones. None of them knew that a family name had just collapsed. Inside, my phone was buzzing nonstop. Tanya had already texted twice before 7. The media's eating each other alive. Stay offline. Henderson's legal team confirmed the audits. Everything we suspected was true. I set the mug down and scrolled through the headlines. Ravenwood Interiors, under investigation for mismanagement. Linda Monroe suspended pending audit. There were even screenshots of company documents, leaked emails, invoices. The story had spread like spilled ink, unstoppable. I thought I'd feel vindicated. Instead, I felt hollow, like the air had been sucked out of something I didn't realize I'd been holding together. By 9, my father called again. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail anyway. "Your mother's not leaving the house," he said, his voice tired, aged. "She's barely eating." "You've made your point, Isabel. Be satisfied." I deleted the message without listening to the rest. Satisfaction wasn't what this was. There was no victory in truth, just exposure. Later that morning, I walked downtown to the Morena office. Tanya was waiting, a phone in one hand, a bag of pastries in the other. "You look calm," she said. "That's either zen or dangerous. Maybe both," I said. She dropped the pastries on the table and handed me a printed report. "The board approved your changes. Vendor payments are getting reorganized. And congratulations, the press is calling you the Phantom Founder. They think you're some secret tech investor." I almost laughed. "Let them." She sat across from me, tapping her nails on the desk. "You sure you don't want to come forward, claim credit?" "No," I said. "It's better this way." "You mean safer." "Peaceful," I corrected. For the rest of the day, we worked through the details: how to stabilize the company's reputation, how to issue quiet layoffs, how to redirect the narrative. I signed documents until my wrist ached. Each page felt like another layer of distance between who I used to be and who I had become. By late afternoon, my phone vibrated again, an unknown number. I ignored it, but it rang again and again until I answered. "Isabel." My mother's voice was thin, brittle, almost unrecognizable. "Mom, you think you've won," she said. Her tone trembled, caught between anger and exhaustion. "But all you've done is destroy this family." I took a slow breath. "No, Mom, I just stopped pretending it was won." There was silence on the line. Then sharply, "You humiliated me. You could have stopped it. You let them drag our name through the dirt." "I didn't start this fire," I said. "I just stopped putting it out for you." "You sound just like your father," she spat. "Then maybe that's the first thing we've ever agreed on." The line went dead. I stood there for a long time, phone still in hand, until Tanya appeared in the doorway. "You okay?" "I will be," I said. "Eventually." That night, I turned off my phone and drove to the waterfront. The air was sharp with salt, the kind that stung your lungs but made you feel awake. I parked near the pier and sat there watching the waves crash against the rocks. The rhythm was steady, indifferent. Nature never cared who deserved peace. It just gave it to those who waited long enough. When I got home, Ethan was on the couch, the TV muted, a takeout box open beside him. "You've been quiet all week," he said. "Tell me what's going on in that head of yours." I sank beside him, unbuttoning my coat. "I'm trying to figure out if justice ever feels good." He tilted his head. "And it doesn't," I said. "It just feels like the truth finally stopped hiding." He smiled faintly. "That's still something." We sat in silence, eating in slow, absent bites. The muted TV flickered with breaking news banners, my mother's face, Chelsea's tears, endless speculation. I turned it off. "She'll call again," Ethan said. "I know. And what will you say?" "Nothing. Some things don't need replies." The next day, the first news outlet published an op-ed about the Monroe legacy. They called my mother a cautionary tale, my sister a symbol of entitlement, and me, the unseen daughter, a mystery. I read it once and shut my laptop. I didn't need strangers to narrate my story. I had lived every sentence already. At noon, Tanya burst into the office, breathless. "You're not going to believe this," she said, waving her phone. Chelsea went live. A full video. She's crying, begging for forgiveness, saying you manipulated the media against her. "Of course she did," I said quietly. "She's getting destroyed in the comments," Tanya continued. "People found the receipts, literally. Screenshots of her invoices, unpaid clients, everything." I took the phone from her hand and watched the clip. Chelsea's makeup was perfect, even her tears looked staged. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," she said, voice shaking. "My sister has always hated me." I stopped the video halfway through. "She's not crying for forgiveness," I said. "She's crying for an audience." Tanya frowned. "You're not even angry." "No," I said. just tired. By evening, the internet had moved on to a new scandal. That's how it always went. People devoured drama, then spat out what was left. But the damage lingered offline. Ravenwood's reputation would take years to rebuild, but it would survive cleaner, stronger, quieter. A few days later, a letter arrived. No stamp, no postmark, just my name, written in the same looping cursive I'd memorized since childhood. I opened it slowly. I didn't mean to lose you. I thought protecting Chelsea meant protecting the family. I see now I was wrong. I see now I never really knew who you were. I hope one day you'll forgive me, Mom. I folded the letter once, then twice, and set it aside. Forgiveness was a kind of currency I no longer carried. That night I walked barefoot along the beach behind the house. The sky was bruised purple, the waves pulling back in long breaths. For the first time, I didn't replay the arguments or the betrayals. I just listened to the sea, to the wind, to the sound of everything ending softly. When I came back inside, I poured a glass of wine and opened my laptop. Tanya had sent me the latest report: Ravenwood's stabilization plan, employee satisfaction numbers, new contracts. The company was breathing again. I sent a quick reply. Good work. Keep going. Before I shut the computer, I paused. My grandmother's words echoed again. Build something that cannot be taken. I whispered them out loud. I did. The next morning, I found an old photo in one of my boxes, me at 16, standing at a robotics competition, grease on my hands, a medal around my neck. My parents hadn't come to that event. I stared at the picture for a long time before tucking it into a frame on my desk, not because it made me proud, but because it reminded me of who I was before anyone tried to rewrite me. Later that day, Ethan asked, "So what now?" I smiled. Now I see what peace feels like when it's earned. He raised his glass to mine. To peace, then. To peace, I echoed. Outside, the sky was clear again, pale and unburdened. For once, I didn't think about revenge or justice or even family. I thought about the quiet that comes after a storm, the kind that doesn't ask for anything except to be felt. And for the first time in my life, I let it. The letter sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days before I opened it. Every morning I'd walk past it, the white envelope, catching the light like a quiet dare. My name was written in my mother's slanted cursive, leaning too far to the right, as if the words themselves were rushing toward apology. On the 3rd day, the sky was overcast, the kind of gray that pressed against the windows. I made a cup of tea, sat down, and slid my finger beneath the flap. The smell of paper and ink hit me first, familiar, almost comforting, like Sunday mornings when she'd write grocery lists in that same handwriting. Then I began to read. Her words were careful. Too careful. I know you think I'm a terrible mother, it began. Maybe I am, but I did my best with what I knew. I sacrificed more than you realize. When your father lost his job, when Chelsea dropped out, when things got tight, I held everything together. You think I took from you, but I was saving us. You've always been the strong one. That's why I depended on you. You never needed as much as she did. The letter went on for pages. Stories rewritten as excuses. Pain dressed up as protection. Near the end, her tone shifted. You've made quite a name for yourself, I hear. I watched that video, the one everyone shared. You looked so confident, so cold. Maybe that's success. Maybe that's what you wanted. I hope you can look past all this and remember that we're still family. You can't erase that, Isabel, no matter how powerful you've become. I folded the letter in half and stared out the window. The tea had gone cold. There were no I'm sorries, no real confessions. Just the same old script, her fear of losing control disguised as love. That night, I sat in the living room and took out my grandmother's letter, the one she'd written years ago on cream stationery. The paper was worn edges, soft from being handled too often. Build something that cannot be taken, she had written. And when they try, let them fail without your help. I set the 2 letters side by side on the table. One written in clarity, the other in desperation. I whispered, I forgive you, but not because you asked. The next morning there was a knock on the door. I froze, half expecting Tanya, but when I looked through the window, I saw my mother standing on the porch in a beige coat, her hair tucked behind her ears. She looked smaller somehow, her posture uncertain. I opened the door. "I shouldn't have come," she said softly. "But I didn't know how else to talk to you." For a second, neither of us moved. The sound of the ocean hummed faintly in the background waves, hitting the rocks below the bluff. "Come in," I said. She stepped inside, glancing around as though seeing my house for the first time. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice trembling. "It suits you." I offered her tea. She nodded, sitting at the kitchen island, fingers tapping against the counter. "I read your letter," I said finally. She sighed. "Then, you know how hard this has been for me." "For you," I repeated. "I'm not saying you were wrong," she continued quickly. I didn't expect you to hate me." I looked at her. "I don't hate you." She hesitated as if she didn't believe me. "Then why do you keep punishing me?" "I'm not punishing you," I said quietly. "I'm just done playing the daughter who apologizes for being hurt." Her eyes filled with tears. "You don't understand, Izzy." I was scared. "I thought if I kept everything under control, money, reputation, your sister, you'd both have a future. I never meant for it to come to this." "Maybe not," I said. "But you chose her every time you had to choose." "That's not true." "Yes, it is." She pressed her lips together. "You were different. Stronger. I thought you didn't need me." "That's the part you never understood," I said. "Needing someone doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." She wiped her eyes, trying to regain composure. "I miss you," she whispered. "I miss the idea of you," I said. "The version I used to believe in." We sat in silence for a while, the sound of the kettle filling the air. When it whistled, I poured the tea and set a cup in front of her. She held it with both hands, staring into the steam. "I sold a few things," she said suddenly. "Some jewelry, some old furniture. It's not much," but she slid a folded check across the counter. "It's for you." I thought it might help somehow. I looked at it but didn't touch it. "You don't need to pay me back." "I do," she said firmly. "You earned that money. I know that now." I folded the check and pushed it back toward her. "Keep it. You'll need it more than I do." Her shoulders sagged. "How can you be so calm after everything?" "Because peace doesn't come from being owed," I said. "It comes from letting go." She stared at me, eyes red. "I wish I'd known how to love you the way you needed." "You could have learned," I said softly. "But you didn't try until it was too late." Her face crumpled. "Can you forgive me?" I took a long breath. "I already did. But that doesn't mean we go back." She nodded slowly, looking down at her hands. "I understand." When she stood to leave, she paused by the door. "Will I see you again?" "That depends on who you decide to be," I said. She gave a small broken smile and stepped outside. The door closed quietly behind her. For a while I just stood there, staring at the empty space where she'd been. Then I opened all the windows, letting the sea breeze in. The air smelled of salt and rain. I poured the untouched tea down the sink and made a fresh cup for myself. Later that afternoon I walked down to the bluff behind the house. The wind was strong, whipping at my hair, pulling strands loose from the braid. I carried both letters, the one from my grandmother and the one from my mother. At the edge of the cliff, I placed them side by side on a flat stone. The waves roared below the horizon, fading into mist. I didn't burn them or tear them apart. I just left them there, letting the tide decide what to do with them. When I turned back toward the house, the sky had started to clear. The sunlight broke through the clouds in long, thin streaks, lighting the path ahead. That evening, I cooked dinner for myself, a simple meal of salmon and roasted vegetables. Ethan was out of town for work, and the quiet felt like company. I ate slowly, savoring the ordinary peace of it all. Afterward, I sat on the porch with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. The sea was calm again, the kind of stillness that felt earned. I thought about my mother's face when she'd asked for forgiveness, about how much of her sorrow came from fear rather than love. And I thought about how freeing it felt not to need her remorse to heal. When the stars began to appear, I whispered to the night, I hope she finds peace too. It wasn't a prayer or a wish, just a truth I could finally say without bitterness. Inside before bed, I opened my journal and wrote, "Some stories don't end with reconciliation. Some just end with understanding." Then I closed it, turned off the light, and listened to the soft hum of the ocean outside. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was carrying anyone else's weight. I was simply here, unbroken, untaken, and enough. The morning light slid softly across the marble floors, washing the house in pale gold. The ocean murmured below the cliffs, calm and certain, like it had nothing left to prove. I moved through the quiet barefoot, a mug of coffee warming my hands. The air smelled faintly of salt and lemon balm from the garden. There was no rush anymore, no deadlines, no battles waiting to be fought. Just the sound of my own footsteps and the steady hum of peace. On the counter sat a small vase of wildflowers, bright and untamed. Tanya had brought them the week before, saying every queen deserves her crown. I'd laughed then, but this morning the flowers meant something else. They were proof that life could bloom even after the hardest winters. I carried my coffee into the studio, the small room beside the staircase that no one had wanted when I first bought the house. The same kind of room I'd grown up in, small, forgotten, and full of echoes. But now it was bright, filled with notebook sketches and framed photos of the scholarship recipients who'd just been approved for the first round of funding from the left of the stairwell foundation. On the wall, a quote painted in soft gray letters read, "Make room for the girls no one believed in." I sat at the desk and opened my laptop. A new message blinked in my inbox from the foundation's coordinator. Funding confirmed. First 3 scholarships ready for announcement. I smiled and scrolled through the short bios of the recipients, young women from small towns, each with stories that sounded heartbreakingly familiar. One of them had written in her essay, "I'm used to being invisible, but maybe that's where innovation begins." I whispered, "You have no idea how right you are." Tanya called just then, her voice bright as ever. "Okay, genius, your foundation's trending again. Someone leaked the story about the anonymous donor. It's not hard to guess it's you, by the way." "I didn't do this for press," I said. "I know," she replied. "But you've officially become the patron saint of underestimated women. I hope you're proud." "I'm not proud," I said softly. "I'm grateful." She paused. "You really are different now. Maybe I just stopped fighting ghosts." We talked for a while about the event she was organizing to launch the foundation publicly. I told her I wouldn't attend, at least not as myself. I didn't need my name in the credits. The work was the reward. Tanya sighed but didn't argue. She understood me better than most. After the call ended, I sat back, letting the ocean light fill the room. A notification flashed on my screen, an email from Chelsea. I hesitated before opening it. "I saw what you're doing with the foundation. It's beautiful. I'm sorry for everything. I hope someday we can start again." No drama, no explanations, just those few lines. I read them twice, then printed the email and slipped it into a frame beside an old photo of us, as kids, 2 girls sitting on a porch step, eating popsicles and laughing. For years I'd looked at that photo and only seen the imbalance. Today I saw the innocence that came before the imbalance began. I didn't reply to her message. Some things didn't need words anymore. By afternoon, Tanya arrived at the house. She carried champagne and that radiant grin of hers. "You, my friend, are impossible to surprise," she said, popping the cork. Lantern's final report just came in. Growth's up 40% since the acquisition. "We did it. We did," I said, smiling. She poured 2 glasses and raised hers. "To revenge that looks suspiciously like grace." I laughed. "To balance." We stood on the terrace, overlooking the water, sipping in silence. The sun was beginning its slow descent, turning everything a shade of amber. Tanya glanced at me, her tone softening. "Does it ever feel strange, knowing you won?" "It wasn't about winning," I said. "It was about making things right." She nodded, eyes glistening. "You did that, Izzy. You really did." When she left, the house grew quiet again. I watched her car disappear down the curved road and then went inside feeling the kind of stillness that no longer felt empty. I sat at my desk as the sky outside deepened into twilight. There was one thing left to do. I took out a sheet of thick cream paper and began writing a letter not to my mother, not to Chelsea, but to the girl I used to be. Dear Isabel, you were never invisible. They just couldn't see past their own reflections. You thought silence made you weak, but it was your armor. Every word you didn't say built the walls that now hold your peace. You have nothing left to prove. You are not who they said you were. You are who you became when no one was watching. I signed it with love from the woman you grew into. I folded the letter neatly and placed it in the drawer beside the photo from the robotics competition, the one where 16-year-old me stood grinning alone with oil on her cheek. Outside, the waves kept their rhythm steady as breath. I poured a glass of wine, stepped out onto the balcony, and leaned against the railing. The sea glowed silver under the moon, endless and forgiving. For a long time I said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Then quietly I spoke into the night. If you've ever been told you were too quiet, too strong, too much, or not enough, remember this. Silence isn't weakness. It's the space where you build the life they said you couldn't. The ocean answered with another wave, soft and sure. I took a deep breath and smiled, not at the past, not at the victory, but at the peace that had finally chosen to stay. Before going back inside, I looked once more at the horizon where the sea met the stars and everything felt possible. And if you're still here listening, maybe you know what I mean. Maybe you've built your own kind of silence, your own kind of strength. Tell me, have you ever had to rebuild yourself from the ground up? What did it teach you? I'd love to hear your story. And if this one spoke to you, stay a little longer. There are more stories waiting here about loss, about power, about the quiet ways we come back stronger. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the farthest, and sometimes silence itself is the loudest truth of all.